And we're live! Hi, everybody! I need to take this mask off. I don't need this mask to read to you. You're right here. I'm right here. Nobody's in each other's faces. We're perfectly fine. Alright, we're going to turn that off. Hello, Angie. I know I'm doing my nightly hair session. I was just out in the barn with the horses. Oh. Are we ready for the next chapters of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban? Hi! Oh, I need my pillow. There we go. Ooh, we're up to 3 viewers now. Hi, everybody! Getting ready to read Harry Potter. Our nightly tradition. We have everybody here. We about ready to go. Let me throw some water in my face. All right. Let's do this. Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Chapter 16. Professor Trelawney's prediction. Now, I need this teapot that I'm about to show you a picture of because, goddamn, is it pretty. Can somebody give me a turtle teapot? Oh, my face looks really pretty right now. Maybe I could screenshot this. This looks really good. Okay, guys. We ready? I need to stop looking at myself. Let's do this. Harry's euphoria at finally winning the Quidditch Cup lasted at least a week. Even the weather seemed to be celebrating. As June approached, the days became cloudless and sultry, and all anybody felt like doing was strolling into the grounds and flopping down on the grass with several pints of iced pumpkin juice, perhaps playing a casual card game or a casual game of gobstones, or watching the giant squid propel itself dreamily across the surface of the lake. But they couldn't. The exams were nearly upon them, and instead of lazing around outside, the students were forced to remain inside the castle, trying to bully their brains into concentrating while enticing wafts of summer air drifted in through the windows. I have hay in my hair. Eve and Fred and George Weasley had been spotted working. They were about to take their OWLs, ordinary wizarding levels. Percy was getting ready to take his NEWTs, nastily exhausting wizarding tests, the highest qualification Hogwarts offered. As Percy hoped to enter the Ministry of Magic, he needed top grades. He was becoming increasingly edgy and gave very severe punishments to anybody who disturbed the quiet of the common rooms in the evening. In fact, the only person who seemed more anxious than Percy was Hermione. Ron and Harry had given up on asking her how she was managing to attend several classes at once, but they couldn't restrain themselves when they saw the exam timetable she'd drawn up for herself. The first column read, I would like to point out, everyone, that my best friend's snake, Slytherin, is watching us read tonight. She wanted to join in. I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm more of a Gryffindor. Monday, 9 o'clock, arithmancy. 9 o'clock, transfiguration. Lunch. 1 o'clock, charms. 1 o'clock, ancient runes. Hermione, Ron said cautiously, because she was liable to explode when interrupted these days. Are you sure you've copied down these times right? What? Snapped Hermione, picking up the exam timetable and examining it. Yes, of course I have. Is there any point asking how you're going to sit 2 exams at once? Said Harry. No, said Hermione shortly. Has either of you seen my copy of Numerology and Grammatica? Oh yeah, I borrowed it for a bit of bedtime reading, said Ron, but very quietly. Hermione started shifting heaps of parchment around on her table, looking for the book. Just then there was a rustle at the window, and Hedwig fluttered in, a note clutched in her beak. It's from Hagrid, said Harry, ripping the note apart. Buckbeak's appeal. It's set for the 6th. That's the day we finish our exam, said Hermione, still looking everywhere for her arithmancy book. And they're coming up here to do it, said Harry, still reading from the letter. Someone from the ministry and an executioner. Hermione looked up, startled. They're bringing the executioner to the appeal? But that sounds as though they've already decided. Yeah, it does, said Harry slowly. They can't, Ron growled. I spent ages reading up stuff for him. They can't just ignore it all. But Harry had a horrible feeling that the Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures had its mind made up by Draco Malfoy. Or by Mr. Malfoy. Draco, who had been noticeably subdued since Gryffindor's triumph in the Quidditch final, seemed to regain some of his old swagger over the next few days. From sneering comments Harry overheard, Malfoy was certain Buckbeak was going to be killed, and seemed thoroughly pleased with himself for bringing it about. It was all Harry could do to stop himself in imitating Hermione and hitting Malfoy in the face on these occasions. And the worst thing of it was that they had no time or opportunity to go and see Hagrid, because the strict new security measures had not been lifted, and Harry didn't dare retrieve his invisibility cloak from below the one-eyed witch. Exam week began, and unnatural... I feel like I'm tripping over myself. Plus, my boss just messaged me. Exam week began, and an unnatural hush fell over the castle. Third years emerged from Transfiguration at lunchtime on Monday, limp and ashen-faced, comparing results and bemoaning the difficulty of the task that they had been set, which had included turning a teapot into a tortoise. Hermione irritated the rest by fussing about how her tortoise had looked more like a turtle, which was the least of everyone else's worries. Mine still had a spout for a tail. What a nightmare! Were the tortoises supposed to breathe steam? It still had a willow-patterned shell. Do you think it'll count against me? Then, after a hasty lunch, it was straight back upstairs for the charms exam. Hermione had been right. Professor Flitwick indeed tested them on cheering charms. Harry slightly overdid his out of nerves, and Ron, who was partnered with him, ended up in fits of hysterical laughter and had to be led away to a quiet room for an hour before he was ready to perform the charm himself. After dinner, the students hurried back to their common rooms, not to relax, but to start revising for care of magical creatures, potions, and astronomy. Hagrid presided over the Care of Magical Creatures exam the following morning with a very preoccupied air indeed. His heart didn't seem to be in it at all. He had provided a large tub of fresh flubberworms for the class, and told them that, to pass the test, their flubberworm had to still be alive at the end of 1 hour. As flubberworms flourished best if left on their own devices, it was the easiest exam any of them had ever sat, and also gave Harry, Ron, and Hermione plenty of opportunity to speak to Hagrid. Beaky's getting a bit depressed, Hagrid told them, bending low on the pretense of checking that Harry's flubberworm was still alive. Been cooped up too long, but still, we'll know day after tomorrow, one way or the other. They had potions that afternoon, which was an unqualified disaster. Try as Harry might, he couldn't get his confusing concoction to thicken, and Snape, standing watching with the air of vindictive pleasure, scribbled something that looked suspiciously like a 0 onto his notes before moving away. Then came astronomy at midnight, up on the tallest tower. History of Magic on Wednesday morning, in which Harry scribbled everything Florine Fetescue had ever told him about medieval witch hunts, while wishing he could have had one of Fetescue's coconut sundaes with him in the stifling classroom. That's the place where Harry sat while he was staying at the Leaky Cauldron in the beginning of the book, the ice cream shop. Wednesday afternoon meant herbology in the greenhouse under a baking hot sun, and then back to the common room once more, with the backs of their necks sunburnt, thinking longingly of this time the next day, when it would all be over. Their second from last exam, on Thursday morning, was Defense Against the Dark Arts. Professor Lupin had compiled the most unusual exam that any of them had ever taken. A sort of obstacle course outside in the sun, where they had to wade across a deep paddling pool containing a grindylow, cross a series of potholes full of redcaps, squish their way across a patch of marsh, ignoring the misleading directions from a hinky-punk, and then climb into an old trunk and battle with a new boggart. "Excellent, Harry," Lupin muttered as Harry climbed out of the trunk, grinning. "Full marks." Flushed from his success, Harry hung around to watch Ron and Hermione. Ron did very well until he reached the hinky-punks, which successfully confused him into sinking waist-high into the quagmire. Quagmire. That's a word I haven't seen in a while. Hermione did everything perfectly until she reached the trunk with the boggart in it. About a minute inside, she burst out again, screaming. "Hermione," said Lupin, startled. "What's the matter?" "Professor McGonagall," Hermione gasped, pointing into the trunk. She said I'd fail everything." It took a little while to calm Hermione down. When at last she had regained a grip on herself, she, Harry, and Ron went back to the castle. Ron was still slightly inclined to laugh at Hermione's boggart, but an argument was averted by the sight that met them at the top of the steps. Cornelius Fudge, sweating slightly in his pinstripe cloak, was standing there staring out at the grounds. He started at the sight of Harry. "Hello there, Harry," he said. "Just had an exam, I expect. Nearly finished?" "Yes," said Harry. Hermione and Ron, not being on speaking terms with the Minister of Magic, hovered awkwardly in the background. "Lovely day," said Fudge, casting an eye over the lake. Pity. He sighed deeply and looked down at Harry. "I'm here on an unpleasant mission, Harry. The Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures required a witness for the execution of a mad hippogriff. As I needed to visit Hogwarts to check on the Black situation, I was asked to step in." "Does that mean the appeal's already happened?" Ron interrupted, stepping forward. No, it's scheduled for this afternoon," said Fudge, looking curiously at Ron. "Then you might not have to witness an execution at all," said Ron stoutly. "The hippogriff might get off." But before Fudge could answer, 2 wizards came through the castle doors behind him. One was so ancient he appeared to be withering before their eyes. The other was tall and strapping, with a thin black mustache. Harry gathered that they were representatives of the Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures, because the very old wizard squinted towards Hagrid cabin and said in a feeble voice, Dear, I'm getting too old for this. 2 o'clock, isn't it, Fudge?" The black-mustached man was fingering something in his belt. Harry looked and saw that he was running one broad thumb along the blade of a shining axe. Ron opened his mouth to say something, but Hermione nudged him hard in the ribs and jerked her head towards the entrance hall. "Why'd you stop me?" said Ron angrily as they entered the great hall for lunch. "Did you see them? They've even got the axe ready. This isn't justice." "Ron, your dad works for the ministry. You can't go saying things like that to his boss," said Hermione, but she too looked very upset. As long as Hagrid keeps his head this time and argues his case properly, they can't possibly execute Buckbeak. But Harry could tell Hermione didn't really believe what she was saying. All around them, people were talking excitedly as they ate their lunch, happily anticipating the end of exams that afternoon. But Harry, Ron, and Hermione, lost in worry about Hagrid and Buckbeak, didn't join in. My tummy just grumbled. I'm hungry. Harry and Ron's last exam was divination, Hermione's Muggle studies. They walked around the marble staircase together. Hermione left them on the first floor, and Harry and Ron proceeded all the way up to the 7th, where many of their classes were sitting on the spiral staircase to Professor Trelawney's classroom, trying to cram in a last bit of last-minute revision. Sorry, these pages are... There's pictures in the background that are messing with the words in front of my eyes. My child's making weird noises out there. She's seeing us all separately, Neville informed them as they went to sit down next to him. He had his copy of Unfogging the Future open on his lap at the pages devoted to crystal gazing. Have either of you ever seen anything in a crystal ball? He asked them unhappily. Nope, said Ron in an offhanded voice. He kept checking his watch. Harry knew that he was counting down the time until Buckbeak's appeal started. The queue of people outside the classroom shortened very slowly. As each person climbed back down the silver ladder, the rest of the class hissed, "What did she ask? Was it okay?" But they all refused to say. "She says the crystal balls told her that if I tell you, I'll have a horrible accident," squeaked Neville as he clambered back down the ladder towards Harry and Ron, who were now reaching the landing. "That's convenient," said Ron. "You know, I'm starting to think Hermione was right about her." He jabbed his thumb toward the trapdoor overhead. "She's a right old fraud." "Right," said Harry, looking at his own watch. It was now 2 o'clock. "I wish she'd hurry up." Parvati came back down the ladder, glowing with pride. "She says I've got all the makings of a true seer," she informed Harry and Ron. "I saw loads of stuff. Well, good luck." She hurried off down the spiral staircase towards Lavender. "Ronald Weasley?" said a familiar, misty voice from over their heads. Ron grimaced at Harry and climbed the silver ladder out of sight. Harry was now the only person left to be tested. He seated himself on the floor with his back against the wall, listening to a fly buzzing in the sunny window, his mind across the grounds with Hagrid. Finally, after about 20 minutes, Ron's large feet reappeared on the ladder. "How'd it go?" Harry asked him, standing up. "Rubbish," said Ron. "Couldn't see a thing, so I made some stuff up. Don't think she was convinced, though." "Meet you in the common room," Harry muttered as Professor Trelawney's voice called, "Harry Potter." The tower room was hotter than ever before. The curtains were closed, the fire was alight, and the usual sickly scent made Harry cough as he stumbled through the clutter of chairs and tables to where Professor Trelawney sat, waiting for him before a large crystal ball. "Good day, my dear," she said softly. "If you would kindly gaze into the orb, take your time now, and tell me what you see within it." Harry bent over the crystal ball and stared as hard as he could, willing it to show him something other than swirling white fog. But nothing happened. "Well?" Professor Trelawney prompted delicately. "What do you see?" The heat was overpowering, and his nostrils were stinging from the perfumed smoke wafting from the fire beside them. He thought of what Ron had just said and decided to pretend. Said Harry, "A dark shape. What does it resemble?" whispered Professor Trelawney. "Think now." Harry cast his mind around, and it landed on Buckbeak. "A hippogriff," he said firmly. "Indeed," whispered Professor Trelawney, screening keenly at the parchment perched upon her knees. "My boy, You may well be seeing the outcome of poor Hagrid's trouble with the Ministry of Magic. Look closer. Does the hippogriff appear to have its head?" "Yes," said Harry firmly. "Are you sure?" Professor Trelawney urged him. "Are you quite sure, dear? You don't see it writhing on the ground, perhaps a shadowy figure rising, an axe before it?" "No," said Harry, starting to feel slightly sick. "No blood? No weeping Hagrid?" "No," said Harry again, wanting more than ever to leave the room and the heat. "It looks fine. It's flying away." Professor Trelawney sighed. "Well, dear, I think we'll leave it there. A little disappointing, but I'm sure you did your best." Relieved, Harry got up, picked up his bag and turned to go, and then a loud, harsh voice spoke behind him. "It will happen tonight!" Harry wheeled around. Professor Trelawney had gone rigid in her armchair. Her eyes were unfocused and her mouth sagging. "Sorry," said Harry, but Professor Trelawney didn't seem to hear him. Her eyes started to roll. Harry stood there in a panic. She looked as though she was about to have some sort of seizure. He hesitated, thinking of running to the hospital wing, but then Professor Trelawney spoke in the same harsh voice, quite unlike her own. "The Dark Lord lies alone and friendless, abandoned by his followers. His servant has been chained for 12 years. Tonight, before midnight, the servant will break free and set out to rejoin his master. The Dark Lord will rise again with his servant's aid, greater and more terrible than ever before. Tonight, before midnight, the servant will set out to rejoin his master." That hurt. Professor Trelawney's head fell forward onto her chest. She made a grunting sort of noise, and then quite suddenly her head snapped up again. "I'm sorry, dear boy," she said dreamily. "The heat of the day, you know. I drifted off for a moment." Harry stood there, still staring. "Is there anything wrong, my dear? You just told me that the Dark Lord was going to rise again, that his servant's going to go back to him." Professor Trelawney looked thoroughly startled. "The Dark Lord? He who must not be named? My dear boy, that's hardly something to joke about. Rise again, indeed." "But you just said it. You said the Dark Lord—" "I think you must have dozed off too, dear," said Professor Trelawney. "I would certainly not presume to predict anything quite as far-fetched as that." Oh, I have a picture to show you. This is the greenhouse. And then Professor Trelawney with her eyes rolled back in her head. Harry climbed back down the ladder in the spiral staircase, wondering, had he just heard Professor Trelawney make a real prediction? Or had that been her idea of an impressive end to the test? 5 minutes later, he was dashing past the security trolls outside the entrance to Gryffindor Tower. Professor Trelawney's words still resounding in his head. People were striding past him in the opposite direction, laughing and joking, heading for the grounds in a bit of a long-awaited freedom. By the time he had reached the portrait hole and the common room, it was almost deserted. Over in a corner, however, sat Ron and Hermione. "Professor Trelawney," Harry panted, "just told me—" But he stopped abruptly at the sight of their faces. "Buckbeak lost," said Ron weakly. "Hagrid's just sent this." Hagrid's note was dry this time. No tears had splattered on it. Yet his hand seemed to have shaken so much that when he wrote it that it was hardly legible. "Lost appeal. They're going to execute at sunset. Nothing you can do. Don't come down. I don't want you to see it. Hagrid." "We've got to go," said Harry at once. "He can't just sit there on his own waiting for the executioner." "Sunset, though. said Ron, who was staring out the window in a glazed sort of way. "Will never be allowed. Especially you, Harry." Harry sank his head into his hands, thinking, "If only we had the invisibility cloak." "Where is it?" said Hermione. Harry told her about leaving it in the passageway under the one-eyed witch. "If Snape sees me anywhere near there again, I'm in serious trouble," he finished. "That's true," said Hermione, getting to her feet. "If he sees you. How do you open the witch's hump again?" You tap it and say, "Descendium," said Harry, but Hermione didn't wait for the rest of his sentence. She strode out of the room, pushed the fat lady's portrait open, and vanished from sight. "She hasn't gone to get it," Ron said, staring after her. She had. Hermione returned a quarter of an hour later with the silvery cloak folded carefully under her robes. "Hermione, I don't know what's gotten into you lately," said Ron, astounded. "First you hit Malfoy, then you walk out on Professor Trelawney." Hermione looked rather flattered. They went down to dinner with everybody else, but did not return to Gryffindor Tower afterwards. Harry had the cloak hidden down the front of his robes. He had to keep his arms folded to hide the lump. They skulked into an empty chamber off the entrance hall, listening, until they were sure it was deserted. They heard a last pair of people hurrying across the hall and a door slamming. Hermione poked her head around the door. "Okay," she whispered. "No one's there. Cloak on." "Hi, Auntie Amber." Walking very close together so that nobody would see them, they crossed the hall on tiptoe beneath the cloak, and then walked down the stone front steps into the grounds. The sun was already sinking behind the forbidden forest, gilding the top branches of the trees. Gilding, not gliding, gilding. They reached Hagrid's cabin and knocked. He was a minute in answering, and when he did, he looked around for his visitor, pale-faced and trembling. "It's us," Harry hissed. "We're wearing the invisibility cloak. Let us in and we can take it off." "You shouldn't have come," Hagrid whispered, but he stood back and they stepped inside. Hagrid shut the door quickly and Harry pulled off the cloak. Hagrid was not crying, nor did he throw himself upon their necks. He looked like a man who did not know where he was or what to do. This helplessness was worse to watch than tears. "Want some tea?" he said. His great hands were shaking as he reached for the kettle. "Where's Buckbeak, Hagrid?" said Hermione hesitantly. I took him outside," said Hagrid, spilling milk all over the table as he filled up the jug. "He's tethered to me pumpkin patch, though I thought he ought to see the trees and some fresh air before... Hagrid's hand trembled so violently that the milk jug slipped from his grasp and shattered on the floor. "I'll do it, Hagrid," said Hermione quickly, hurrying over and starting to clean up the mess. "There's another one in the cupboard," Hagrid said, sitting down and wiping his forehead on his sleeve. Harry glanced at Ron, who looked back hopelessly. "Isn't there anything more we can do, Hagrid?" Harry said fiercely, sitting down next to him. "Dumbledore..." "He tried," said Hagrid. He got no power to overrule the committee. He told him Buckbeak's all right, but they're scared. You know what Lucius Malfoy's like. Threatened him, I expect. And the executioner, McNair, he's an old pal of Malfoy's. It'll be quick and clean, and I'll be beside him." Hagrid swallowed. His eyes were darting all over the cabin as though looking for some shred of hope or comfort. "Dumbledore's going to come down while it happens. Wrote me this morning. Said he's wants to be with me. Great man, Dumbledore." Hermione, who had been rummaging in Hagrid's cupboard for another milk jug, let out a small, quickly stifled sob. She straightened up with the new jug in her hands, fighting back tears. "We'll stay with you too, Hagrid," she began, but Hagrid shook his shaggy head. "Nope, you're to go back to the castle. I told you I don't want you watching. And you shouldn't be down here anyway. If Fudge and Dumbledore catch you out without permission, Harry, you'll be in big trouble." Silent tears were now streaming down Hermione's face, but she hid them from Hagrid, bustling around making tea. And then, as she picked up the milk bottle to pour something into the jug, she let out a shriek. "Ron! I don't believe it! It's Scabbers!" Ron gasped at her. "What are you talking about?" Hermione carried the milk jug over to the table and turned it upside down. With a frantic squeak and much scrambling to get back inside, Scabbers the rat came sliding out of onto the table. "Scabbers!" said Ron blankly. "Scabbers, what are you doing here?" He grabbed the struggling rat and held him up into the light. Scabbers looked dreadful. He was thinner than ever, large tufts of hair had fallen out, leaving wide bald patches, and he writhed in Ron's hands as though desperate to free himself. "It's okay, Scabbers," said Ron. "No cats, there's nothing here to hurt you." Hagrid suddenly stood up, his eyes fixed on the window. His normally ruddy face had gone the color of parchment. "They're coming." He, Ron, and Hermione whipped around. A group of men was walking down the distant castle steps. In front was Albus Dumbledore, his silver beard gleaming in the dying sun. Next to him trotted Cornelius Fudge. Behind them came the feeble old committee member and the executioner, McNair. "You gotta go," said Hagrid. Every inch of him was trembling. "They mustn't find you here. Go on now." Ron stuffed Scabbers into his pocket, and Hermione picked up the cloak. "I'll take you out the back way," said Hagrid. They followed him through the door into his back garden. Harry felt strangely unreal, and even more so when he saw Buckbeak a few yards away, tethered to a tree behind Hagrid's pumpkin patch. Buckbeak seemed to know something was happening. He turned his sharp head from side to side and pawed the ground nervously. "It's okay, Beaky," said Hagrid softly. "It's okay." He turned to Harry, Ron, and Hermione. "Go on now," he said. "Get going." But they didn't move. "Hagrid, we can't." "We'll tell them what really happened. They can't kill him." "Go," said Hagrid fiercely. "It's bad enough without you lot in trouble and all." They had no choice. As Hermione threw the cloak over Harry and Ron, they heard voices at the front of the cabin. Hagrid looked at the place where they had just vanished from sight. "Go quick," he said hoarsely. "Don't listen." And he strode back into the cabin as someone knocked on the front door. Slowly, in a kind of horrified trance, Harry, Ron, and Hermione set off silently around Hagrid's house. As they reached the other side, the front door closed with a sharp snap. "Please, let's hurry," Hermione whispered. "I can't stand it. Can't bear it." They started up the sloping lawn towards the castle. The sun was sinking fast now. The sky had turned a clear purple, tinged grey. But to the west there was a ruby-red glow. "Sorry, guys. I'm tired today." Ron stopped dead. "Oh, please, Ron," Hermione began. "It's Scabbers. He won't stay put." Ron was bent over, trying to keep Scabbers in his pocket, but the rat was going berserk, squeaking madly, twisting and flailing, trying to sink his teeth into Ron's hand. "Scabbers, it's me, you idiot! It's Ron!" Ron hissed. They heard a door open behind them and men's voices. "Oh, Ron, please, let's move. They're gonna do it," Hermione breathed. "Oh, Scabbers, stay put!" They walked forwards. Harry, like Hermione, was trying not to listen to the rumble of voices behind them. Ron stopped again. "I can't hold him. Scabbers, shut up. Someone will hear us." The rat was squeaking wildly, but not loudly enough to cover up the sounds drifting from Hagrid's garden. There was a jumble of indecent male voices. Indistinct, not indecent. There was a jumble of indistinct male voices, a silence, and then, without warning, the unmistakable swish and thud of an axe. Hermione swayed on the spot. "They did it," she whispered to Harry. I don't believe it. They did it." I need a shot of whiskey. Uno momento, por favor. We drinking tonight? We'll do a half a shot because I haven't eaten dinner yet, but I want my voice to be better for the next chapter. Ooh. You ready? Cheers, guys. We're about to read chapter 17, Cat, Rat, and Dog. Lovely feeling. Harry's mind had gone blank with shock. The three of them stood transfixed with horror under the invisibility cloak. The very last rays of the setting sun were casting a bloody light over the long-shadowed grounds. Then, behind them, they heard a wild howling. Hagrid, Harry muttered. Without thinking about what he was doing, he made to turn back. But Ron and Hermione seized his arms. "We can't," said Ron, who was paper white. "He'll be in worse trouble if they know that we've been to see him." Hermione's breath was shallow and uneven. "How could they?" she choked. "How could they?" "Come on," said Ron, whose teeth seemed to be chattering. They set off back towards the castle, walking slowly to keep themselves hidden under the cloak. Light was fading fast now. By the time they reached open ground, darkness was settling like a spell around them. "Scabbers, keep still!" Ron hissed, clapping his hand over his chest. The rat was wriggling madly. Ron came to a sudden halt, trying to force Scabbers deep into his pocket. "What's the matter with you, you stupid rat? Stay still!" "Ouch! He bit me!" "Ron, be quiet!" Hermione whispered urgently. "Fudge will be here in a minute. He won't stay put." Scabbers was plainly terrified. He was writhing with all his might, trying to break free of Ron's grip. What's the matter with him? But Harry had just seen, slinking towards them, his body low to the ground, wide yellow eyes glinting in the darkness, Crookshanks. Whether he could see them or was following the sound of Scabbers' squeaks, Harry couldn't tell. "Crookshanks," Hermione moaned. "No! Go away, Crookshanks! Shoo! Go away!" But the cat was getting nearer. "Scabbers, no!" Too late. The rat had slipped between Ron's clutching fingers, hit the ground, and scampered away. In one bound, Crookshanks sprang after him, and before Hermione or Harry could stop him, Ron had thrown the invisibility cloak off himself and pelted into the darkness. "Ron!" Hermione moaned. She and Harry looked at each other and then followed at a sprint. It was impossible to run under the cloak. They pulled it off and it streamed behind them like a banner. As they hurtled after Ron, they could hear his feet thudding along ahead and his shouts at Crookshanks. "Get away from him! Get away! Scabbers, come here!" Then there was a loud thud. "Gotcha! Get off, you stinking cat!" Harry and Hermione almost fell over Ron. They skidded to a stop in front of him. He was sprawled on the ground, but Scabbers was back in his pocket. He had both hands held tightly over the quivering lump. "Ron, come on, under the cloak!" Hermione panted. "Dumbledore, the minister, they'll be back in a minute!" But before they could cover themselves again, before they could even catch their breath, they heard the soft pounding of gigantic paws. Something was bounding towards them in the darkness. An enormous, pale-eyed, jet-black dog. Harry reached for his wand, but too late. The dog made an enormous leap, and its front paws hit him on the chest. He keeled over backwards in a whirl of hair. He felt its hot breath, saw inch-long teeth. But the force of its leap had carried it too far. It rolled off him, dazed, feeling as though his ribs were broken. Harry tried to stand up. He could hear it growling as it skittered around for a new attack. Ron was on his feet. As the dog sprung back towards them, he pushed Harry aside. The dog's face Jesus. The dog's jaws fastened instead around Ron's outstretched arm. Harry lunged at it and seized a handful of the brute's hair, but it was dragging Ron away as easily as if he were a rag doll. Then, out of nowhere, something hit Harry across the face, and he was knocked off his feet again. He heard Hermione shriek with pain and fall too. Harry groped for his wand, blinking blood out of his eyes. "Lumos!" he whispered. The wand light showed him the trunk of a thick tree. They had chased Scabbers into the shadows of the whomping willow, and its branches were creaking as though in a high wind, whipping backwards and forwards to stop them from going nearer. And there, at the base of the trunk, was the dog, dragging Ron backwards into a large gap in the roots. Ron was fighting furiously, but his head and torso were slipping out of sight. "Ron!" Harry shouted, trying to follow, but a heavy branch whipped lethally through the air, and he was forced backwards again. All he could see now was one of Ron's legs, which he had hooked around a root in an effort to stop the dog from pulling him further underground. Then a horrible crack cut the air like a gunshot. Ron's leg had broken. Ugh. And the next second, his foot had vanished from sight. Ugh. "Harry, we've got to go for help!" Hermione cried, and she was bleeding too. The willow had cut her across the shoulder. "No! That thing's big enough to eat him! We've got to get time! We haven't got time! We'll never get through without help!" Another branch whipped down at them, twigs clenched like knuckles. "If that dog can get in, we can!" Harry panted, darting here and there, trying to find a way through the vicious, swishing branches. But he couldn't get an inch nearer to the tree roots without being in range of the tree's blows. "Oh, help! Help!" Hermione whispered frantically, dancing uncertainly on the spot. "Please!" Crookshanks darted forward. He slithered between the battering branches like a snake and placed his front paws upon a knot on the trunk. Abruptly, as though the tree had been turned to marble, it stopped moving. Not a leaf twitched or shook. "Crookshanks!" whispered Hermione uncertainly. She now grasped Harry's arm painfully. "How did he know?" "He's friends with that dog," said Harry grimly. "I've seen them together. Come on, and keep your wand out." They covered the distance to the trunk in seconds, but before they could reach the gap in the roots, Crookshanks had slid into it with a flick of his bottle-brush tail. Harry was next. He crawled forwards, head first, and slid down an earthy slope to the bottom of a very low tunnel. Crookshanks was a little ways along, his eyes flashing in the light from Harry's wand. Seconds later, Hermione slithered down beside him. "Where's Ron?" she whispered in a terrified voice. "This way," said Harry, setting off, bent back after Crookshanks. Bent backed. "Where does this tunnel come out?" Hermione asked breathlessly from behind him. "I don't know. It's marked on the Marauder's map, but Fred and George said no one's ever gone in it. It goes off the edge of the map. It looks like it ends up in Hogsmeade." They moved as fast as they could, bent almost double. Ahead of them, Crookshanks' tail bobbed in and out of view. On and on went the passage. It felt at least as long as the one to Honeyduke's. All Harry could think of was Ron, with the enormous dog, and what the enormous dog must be doing to him. He was drawing breath in sharp, painful gasps, running at a crouch. Then the tunnel began to rise. Moments later it twisted, and Crookshanks had gone. Instead, Harry could see a patch of dim light through a small opening. He and Hermione paused, gasping for breath, edging forwards. Both raised their wands to see what lay beyond. It was a room, very disordered and dusty. Paper was peeling from the walls, and there were stains all over the floor. Every piece of furniture was broken as though somebody had smashed it. The windows were all boarded up. I'm glad you get it, Angie. I'm talking with a British accent now. I'm so sorry. Harry glanced at Hermione, who looked very frightened, but nodded. Harry pulled himself out of the hole, staring around. The room was deserted, but a door to their right stood open, leading to a shadowy hallway. Hermione suddenly grabbed Harry's arm again, her eyes wide, and were traveling around the boarded windows. Harry, she whispered, I think we're in the Shrieking Shack. Excuse me. Sorry guys, I had to eat something. My stomach is literally eating itself right now. Keto diet, pork rinds, amazing. I'm already back, silly. How can you miss me when I'm already back? Seriously though, if anybody is trying to be low carb or keto, get pork rinds. They're amazing. Let's see, these are zero carbs. Zero carbs. I get the salt and pepper ones because I don't like just plain pork rinds. It's weird to just eat fat. All right. I'm super, super hungry, guys. I forgot to eat all day today. I don't think I even had breakfast. I didn't even have my protein shake today. Can I edit this section of the video out? The part where I'm just stuffing my face with pork rinds while reading Harry Potter. Oh, that's right, Angie. You talk about yourself. You's a snack lady. Mm-hmm. You should not say that kind of stuff in front of your child, though. That's rude. Not rude. It's just wrong. Manny, your mom just called herself hot. Give you an idea. She is very pretty, though. I love your mom. Okay. Itch the nose. I'd do you, Angie. Harry looked around. His eyes fell on a wooden chair near them. Large chunks had been torn out of it, and one of the legs had been ripped off entirely. Ghosts didn't do that, he said slowly. At that moment, there was a creak overhead. Something had moved upstairs. Both of them looked at the ceiling. Hermione's grip on Harry's arm was so tight he was losing feeling in his fingers. He raised his eyebrows at her, and she nodded again and let go. Quickly as they could, they crept out into the hall and up the crumbling staircase. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust except the floor, where a wide, shiny strip had been made by something being dragged upstairs. They reached the dark landing. Nox, they whispered together. So Lumos lights it, Nox closes it. They whispered together, and the lights at the end of their wands went out. Only one door was open. As they crept towards it, they heard movement from behind. A low moan, and then a deep, loud purring. They exchanged a last look, a last nod. Wand held tightly before him. Harry kicked the door wide open. On a magnificent four-poster bed with dusty hangings lay Crookshanks, purring loudly at the sight of them. On the floor beside him, clutching his leg, which stuck out at a strange angle, was Ron. Harry and Hermione dashed across to him. "Ron, are you okay? Where's the dog?" "Not a dog," said Ron. His teeth were gripped in pain. "Harry, it's a trap." "What?" "He's the dog! He's an animagus!" Harry was staring over Sorry, I was reconnecting. With a snap, the man in the shadows closed the door behind him. A mass of filthy, matted hair hung to his elbows. If eyes hadn't been shining out of the deep, dark sockets, he might have been a corpse. The waxy skin was stretched so tightly over the bones of his face, it looked like a skull. His yellow teeth were bared in a grin. It was Sirius Black. "Expelliarmus!" he croaked, pointing Ron's wand at them. Harry and Hermione's wands shot out of their hands high in the air, and Black caught them. And then he took a step closer. His eyes were fixed on Harry. "I thought you'd come and help your friend," he said hoarsely. His voice sounded as though he had long ago lost the habit of using it. "Your father would have done the same for me. Brave of you not to run for a teacher. I'm grateful. It will make everything much easier." The taunt about his father rang in Harry's ears as though Black had bellowed it. A boiling hate erupted in Harry's chest, leaving no place for fear. For the first time in his life, he wanted his wand back in his hand, not to defend himself, but to attack, to kill. Without knowing what he was doing, he started forwards, but there was a sudden movement on either side of him, and two pairs of hands grabbed him and held him back. "No, Harry," Hermione gasped in a petrified whisper. Ron, however, spoke to Black. "If you kill Harry, you'll have to kill us too," he said fiercely. Though the effort of standing up had drained him of still more color, and he swayed slightly as he spoke. Something flickered in Black's shadowed eyes. "Lay down," he said quietly to Ron. "You will damage that leg even more." "Did you hear me?" Ron said weakly, though he was clinging painfully to Harry and trying to stay upright. "You'll have to kill all three of us." "There'll only be one murder here tonight," said Black. His grin widened. "Why's that?" Harry spat, trying to wrench himself free of Ron and Hermione. "Didn't care last time, did you? Didn't mind slaughtering all those muggles to get at Pettigrew? What's the matter? Gone soft in Azkaban?" "Harry," Hermione whispered, "be quiet." "He killed my mom and dad!" Harry roared, and with a huge effort he broke free of Hermione and Ron's restraint and lunged forward. He had forgotten about magic. He had forgotten that he was short and skinny and 13, whereas Black was tall and a full-grown man. All Harry knew was that he wanted to hurt Black as badly as he could, and that didn't care how much he got hurt in return. Perhaps it was the shock of Harry doing something so stupid, but Black didn't raise a wand in time. One of Harry's hands flattened over Black's wasted wrist, forcing the wand tip away. The knuckles of Harry's other hand collided with the side of Black's head, and they fell backwards into the wall. Hermione was screaming. Ron was yelling. There was a blinding flash as the wands in Black's hands sent into the air a jet of sparks, which missed Harry's face by inches. Harry felt the sunken arm under his fingers twisting madly, but he clung on, his other hand punching every part of Black it could find. But Black's free hand found Harry's throat. "No!" he hissed. "I've waited too long!" The fingers tightened. Harry choked, his glasses askew. And then he saw Hermione's foot swing out of nowhere. Black let go of Harry with a grunt of pain. Ron had thrown himself on Black's wand hand, and Harry heard a faint clatter. He fought free of the tangle of bodies and saw his own wand rolling across the floor, and he threw himself towards it. But Crookshanks had joined the fray. Both sets of front paws had sunk themselves deep into Harry's arm. Harry threw himself off, but Crookshanks now darted towards Harry's wand. "No, you don't!" roared Harry, and he aimed a kick at Crookshanks that made the cat leap aside, spitting. Harry snatched up his wand and turned. "Get out of the way!" he shouted at Ron and Hermione. I feel better since food's in my tummy. They didn't need telling twice. Hermione, gasping for breath, her lip bleeding, scrambled aside, snatching up her and Ron's wands. Ron crawled to the four-poster and collapsed onto it, panting, his white face now tinged with green, both hands clutching his broken leg. Black was sprawled at the bottom of the wall. His thin chest rose and fell rapidly as he watched Harry walking slowly nearer, his wand pointing straight at Black's heart. "Going to kill me, Harry?" His wand still pointed at Black's chest, looking down at him. A livid bruise was raising around Black's eye, and his nose was bleeding. "You killed my parents," said Harry, his voice shaking slightly, but his wand hand quite steady. Black stared at him out of those sunken eyes. "I don't deny it," he said very quietly, "but if you knew the whole story—" "The whole story?" Harry repeated, a furious pounding in his ears. "You sold them to Voldemort! That's all I need to know!" "You've got to listen to me," Black said, and there was a note of urgency in his voice. "You'll regret it if you don't. You don't understand." "I understand a lot better than you think," said Harry. His voice shook more than ever. "You never heard her, did you? My mum, trying to stop Voldemort from killing me. You did that! You did it!" But neither of them could say another word. Something ginger streaked past Harry, and Crookshanks leapt onto Black's chest and settled himself there, right over Black's heart. Black blinked and looked down at the cat. "Get off," he murmured, trying to push Crookshanks off of him. But Crookshanks sank his claws into Black's robes and wouldn't shift. He turned his ugly, squished face to Harry and looked up at him with those great yellow eyes. To his right, Hermione gave a dry sob. Harry stared down at Black and Crookshanks, his grip tightening on the wand. So what if he had to kill a cat too? It was in league with Black. If it was prepared to die trying to protect Black, that wasn't Harry's business. If Black wanted to save it, that only proved he cared more for Crookshanks than Harry's parents. Harry raised the wand. Now was the moment to do it. Now was the moment to avenge his mother and father. He was going to kill Black. He had to kill Black. This was his chance. The seconds lengthened, and then Harry stood frozen there, wand poised. And still Harry stood frozen there, wand poised. Black staring up at him, Crookshanks on his chest, Ron's ragged breathing coming from the bed. Hermione was quite silent. And then came a new sound. Muffled footsteps were echoing up through the floor. Someone was moving downstairs. "We're up here!" Hermione screamed. "We're up here! Sirius Black! Quick!" Black made a startled movement that almost dislodged Crookshanks, Harry gripping his wand convulsively. "Do it now!" said a voice in his head, but the footsteps were thundering up the stairs, and Harry still hadn't done it. We're about to have some excitement. The door of the room burst open in a shower of red sparks, and Harry wheeled around as Professor Lupin came hurtling into the room, his face bloodless, his wand raised and ready. His eyes flickered over to Ron, lying on the floor, over Hermione, cowering next to the door, to Harry, standing there with his wand covering Black, and then to Black himself, crumpled and bleeding at Harry's feet. "Expelliarmus!" Loomis shouted. Harry's wand flew once more out of his hand, and so did the two Hermione was holding. Lupin caught them all daftly, and then moved into the room, staring at Black, who still had Crookshanks lying protectively across his chest. Harry stood there, suddenly feeling empty. He hadn't done it. His nerve had failed him. Black was going to be handed back to the Dementors. Then Lupin spoke, in an odd voice, a voice that shook with some suppressed emotion. "Where is he, Sirius?" Harry looked quickly at Lupin. He didn't understand what Lupin meant. What was Lupin talking about? He turned to look at Black again. Black's face was quite expressionless. For a few seconds he didn't move at all, and then very slowly he raised his empty hand and pointed straight at Ron. Mystified, Harry glanced around at Ron, who looked bewildered. "But then," Lupin muttered, staring at Black so intently it seemed he was trying to read his mind, "why hasn't he shown himself before now? Unless—" Lupin's eyes suddenly widened, as though he was seeing something beyond Black, something none of the rest could see. "Unless he was the one. Unless you switched without telling me." Very slowly, his sunken gaze never leaving Lupin's face, Black nodded. "Professor Lupin," Harry interrupted loudly, "what's going on?" But he never finished the question, because what he saw made his voice die in his throat. Lupin was lowering his wand. Next moment, he had walked to Black's side, seized his hand, pulled him to his feet so that Crookshanks fell to the floor, and embraced Black like a brother. Harry felt as though the bottom had dropped out of his stomach. "I don't believe it!" Hermione screamed. Lupin let go of Black and turned to her. She had raised herself off the floor and was pointing at Lupin, wild-eyed. You? Hermione, you and him?" "Hermione, calm down." "I didn't tell anyone," Hermione shrieked. "I was covering for you." "Hermione, listen to me, please," Lupin shouted. "I can explain." Harry could feel himself shaking, not with fear, but with a fresh wash of fury. "I trusted you," he shouted at Lupin, his voice wavering out of control. "And all the time you've been his friend?" "You're wrong," said Lupin. "I haven't been Sirius's friend for 12 years, but I am now, and let me explain." "No!" Hermione screamed. "Harry, don't trust him. He's been helping Black into the castle. He wants you dead too. He's a werewolf." There was a ringing silence. Everyone's eyes were now on Lupin, who looked remarkably calm, though rather pale. "Not at all up to your usual standard, Hermione," he said. "Only 1 out of 3, I'm afraid. I have not been helping Sirius get into the castle, and I certainly don't want Harry dead." An odd shiver passed over his face, "but I won't deny that I am a werewolf." Ron made a valiant effort to get up again, but fell back with a whimper of pain. Lupin made towards him, looking concerned, but Ron gasped, "Get away from me, werewolf!" Lupin stopped dead. Then, with an obvious effort, he turned to Hermione and said, "How long have you known?" "Ages," Hermione whispered, "since I did Professor Snape's essay." "He'll be delighted," said Lupin coldly. "He set that essay hoping someone would realize what my symptoms meant. Did you check the lunar chart and realize that it was always ill at the full moon? Or did you realize that the boggart changed into the moon when it saw me?" "Both," Hermione said quietly. Lupin forced a laugh. "You're the cleverest witch of an age I've ever met, Hermione." "I'm not," Hermione whispered. "If I'd been a bit cleverer, I'd have told everyone what you are." "But they already know," said Lupin. "At least the staff do." "Dumbledore hired you when he knew you were a werewolf?" Ron gasped. "Is he mad?" "Some of the staff thought so," said Lupin. "He had to work very hard to convince certain teachers that I'm trustworthy." "And he was wrong!" Harry yelled. "You've been helping him all this time!" He was pointing at Black, who had crossed to the 4-poster bed and sunk onto it, his face hidden in one of his shaking hands. Crookshanks leapt up beside him and stepped onto his lap, purring. Ron edged away from both of them, dragging his leg. "I have not been helping Sirius," said Lupin. "If you'll give me a chance, I'll explain. Look." He separated Harry, Ron, and Hermione's wands and threw them back to each owner. Harry caught his, stunned. "There," said Lupin, sticking his own wand back into his belt. "You're armed. We're not. Now will you listen?" Harry didn't know what to think. Was it a trick? "If you haven't been helping him," he said with a furious glare at Black, "how did you know he was here?" "The map," said Lupin. "The Marauder's map. I was in my office examining it." "You know how it works?" said Harry suspiciously. "Of course I know how to work it," said Lupin, waving his hand impatiently. "I helped write it. I'm Moony. That was my friend's nickname for me at school. You wrote... The important thing is, I was watching it carefully this evening because I had an idea that you, Ron, and Hermione might try and sneak out of the castle to visit Hagrid before his hippogriff was executed. And I was right, wasn't I?" He was starting to pace up and down, looking at them. Little patches of dust rose up at his feet. "You might have been wearing your father's old cloak, Harry. How do you know about the cloak?" "The number of times I saw James disappearing under it," said Lupin, waving an impatient hand. "The point is, even if you're wearing an invisibility cloak, you show up on the Marauder's map. I watched you cross the grounds and enter Hagrid's hut. 20 minutes later, you left Hagrid and set off back towards the castle. But you were now accompanied by somebody else." "What?" said Harry. "No, we weren't." "I couldn't believe my eyes," said Lupin, still pacing and ignoring Harry's interruption. "I thought the map must be malfunctioning. How could he be with you?" "Yes." "No one was with us," said Harry. "And then I saw another dot, moving fast towards you, labeled Sirius Black. I saw him collide with you, watched as he pulled you two off into the Whomping Willow." "One of us," said Ron angrily. "No, Ron," said Lupin. "Two of you." He had stopped his pacing, his eyes moving over Ron. "Do you think I could have looked at the rat? Do you think I could have a look at that rat?" he said evenly. "What?" said Ron. "What's Scabbers got to do with it?" "Everything," said Lupin. "Can I see him, please?" Ron hesitated and then put his hand inside his robes. Scabbers emerged, thrashing desperately. Ron had to seize his long, bald tail to stop him from escaping. Crookshanks stood up on Black's lap and made a soft, hissing noise. Lupin moved closer to Ron. He seemed to be holding his breath as he gazed intently at Scabbers. "What?" said Ron again, holding Scabbers close to him, looking scared. "What's my rat got to do with anything?" "That's not a rat!" croaked Sirius Black suddenly. "What do you mean? Of course he's a rat!" "No, he's not," said Lupin quietly. "He's a wizard." "An animagus," said Black, "by the name of Peter Pettigrew." And that, my dears, is the end of chapter 17. Tomorrow we will move on to chapter 18, Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs. I will have a better voice tomorrow. I will remember to eat tomorrow. Now, I must bid you adieu. Thank you for watching.